It's the 1930s. Carl Tanzler was an eccentric man with a strange obsession. He was convinced that he was destined to find a certain young woman that an angel bestowed upon him. She had flowing black hair and tan skin. He had reoccurring dreams of the spitting image of this woman. And even when he was married and had a kid, he was utterly obsessed with the idea of finding this woman to the point that his wife and his child couldn't be around him and they ended up leaving. So Carl ended up moving to America to find a job, and he ended up finding a job as a radiologist in Florida. And right whenever he was about to give up on his dream of finding this woman, she appeared before him. Her name was Elena. However, this girl was quite young at 21 years old, where Carl was 53 years old. Also, on top of everything else, she was dying of tuberculosis. And since Carl was still convinced at the fact that this was supposed to be his wife, this is his destiny, even though the enormous age gap, he stopped everything that he was doing and convinced the family that he was a doctor, and he dedicated his entire life, everything, into finding a cure for her and saving her life. Even stealing equipment from the hospital and constantly donating money to her family. Carl even performed experiments on Elena that he believed would actually help her out, but in the long run, it probably just made it worse. And also, he was quite open about his insane obsession with her, which she did not reciprocate at all. It was one of those situations where, she appreciated all the help he was giving her, but, kind of creepy old man. However, after a while, she succumbed to her illness and finally passed away. Now, Carl, he was so distraught at her being dead, he paid for her funeral and even had an entire mausoleum built in her honor. He visited that tomb every single day after she passed. However, a few years later, there was a knock on his door by police officers, actually. See, he lived in basically what you would consider a junkyard, and he's received multiple complaints of some weird activity in his house. See, everyone in the neighborhood knew for a fact that he lived alone. However, there were multiple accounts of people seeing him dancing with a woman in his house. So people started speculating that maybe he kidnapped someone or was holding someone against their will, because they never saw that person come or go. They just stayed at the house while he did everything. So people obviously were concerned. So after a while, the cops arrived at his door, and what they found was definitely not someone being kept against their will, because this person can't really have a will as they are dead. Yes, Carl actually grave robbed Elena's tomb, took her to his house, and basically mummified her, making her look like some weird, creepy doll creature. And the worst part about it is Carl has kept Elena in his house for 7 years straight. He stole her body and preserved it in order to keep her alive in a way. And this solidified him as the man who married a corpse bride, if you will. Yeah. Corpse Bride is a movie that has really garnered itself a cult following, especially around the time of Halloween. I mean, you could even say it's on par with Jack Skellington in The Nightmare Before Christmas. And honestly, I've never fully seen this movie up until very recently. And I know, coming from someone who loves Tim Burton and loves all of his work and just loves stop motion animation, you would think, why would I not watch this? I mean, honestly, I don't really know why. It could just be it's one of those things that everyone was talking about and everyone loved, and I was an edgy kid who's just like, no, I don't like what everyone else is doing. I'm cool. But it also could be because it's a romance and I just don't like romantic movies. It's just not my thing. And no, it's not really because I think they're bad or even cringe sometimes, but it's more the fact that romance films lead people to believe that love is a certain way. And a lot of times romance movies just get love completely wrong. And also that could be akin to why there's so many people in the world who worship and idealize this perfect version of love that just doesn't exist because it's just Hollywood movies. But I feel like that's a video for another day, don't you think? But where this movie technically is a romance, it's a romance with the side of a ridiculous premise that makes it more entertaining. And also the way Tim Burton handled love, I feel, was a lot better than most movies that I see. And it's also a very short movie, but that doesn't take away from anything, honestly. I mean, I kind of prefer short movies if they're done well, and this movie did it pretty well. And something I really love about this movie is the color scheme and how it plays an important role in a message that he's trying to send, and also just the story. See, the real world is a black and white and gray, and everyone's boring. No one really has a personality. Whereas the world of the dead is bright, it's vibrant, it's fun. Everyone's, dancing and having a great time. It shows that most people in the real world aren't even living at all just because the social constraints that they put on themselves and all the stress that they put on themselves. You know, people want to really hold up like a certain image about themselves, whereas in the afterlife, no one gives a shit. No one cares who you are or what you were. They're just having fun. They're partying. So in a way, it seems like the afterlife, it's kind of popping. It's kind of bumping, because when people don't have these social constructs in their head that they need to be this certain way, then they could actually be themselves. But hey, I might be reading into this way too much. But the basic premise of this movie is the main character, Victor Van Dort, is planned to wed Victoria. However, they've never met. You know, it's a pre-planned wedding. And the big issue here is the family of Victoria wants her to marry into a family with good money, which this is a huge point throughout this movie, because, you know, back then and even now, some people just get married because of money, you know, not because the actual love involved in it, but because of the money. But regardless of the horrible intentions of the said wedding, they did end up falling for each other quite quickly. Some would say love at first sight. But whenever Victor couldn't remember his vows, he ended up running to the forest and practicing his vows in front of what he thought was a twig, a tree. And then he put a ring on what he thought was a twig, but it happened to be the finger of a dead lady. Rise from the ashes! And shenanigans ensue, you know. And something else that I noticed, I mean, I'm sure other people have noticed this as well, but if you look at the movie Frankenweenie, the main character looks quite similar to the main character in Corpse Bride. Not only that, but both of their names are Victor. And on top of that, in the movie, they both have a relationship with a corpse. Now, obviously, there are a lot of plot holes with this theory, but I just thought this was interesting, thinking about how possibly Victor as a child was actually just, you know, the child in Frankenweenie. And when we go to Victor, when he was in the land of the dead, he actually got to see his dead dog, whose name was Scraps, who was, you know, similar in length and name to Sparky, which is the dog in Frankenweenie. And obviously we could talk about how their worlds are black and white as well, but there obviously is a lot of plot holes that wouldn't really line up to that being the child version of Victor Van Dort in Corpse Bride, but still, pretty cool theory, I think. There's a lot of interesting little facts and tidbits that went into the behind the scenes of this movie. Like, for example, this movie was in production in the exact same time that Charlie and the Chocolate Factory was in production. If you guys know this, Tim Burton directed both of these movies. And not only that, but Johnny Depp, Helena Bonham Carter, and Christopher Lee were on both movies as well. The general thing that they always said was they were acting by day and doing voice lines by night. I can't imagine the creative weight that was on their shoulders during all of this. It really makes you give a new appreciation to not only this movie, but Charlie and the Chocolate Factory as well. Also, this movie had a lot of firsts when it came to stop motion. For example, a lot of what stop motion does is to create a bunch of different faces with different facial features, and they kind of just switch them out every single time they want a different expression. Whereas in Corpse Bride, they actually had mechanical faces, where they had little gears in there that can make them smile, move their face around, and all their different facial features, which actually ended up putting them back because they figured out, you know, the switching out is a lot quicker than actually twiddling the little stuff, but there's more customization with it. And also they decided to record this in digital, which was a huge deal because they were not used to this. But then they realized digital is just a lot quicker. You could kind of see it when it happens rather than wait for the film and all that different stuff. And this movie actually took an entire year to record, which does sound like a lot, but actually The Nightmare Before Christmas took 3 years. So there was actually a huge improvement in this. Also, another little tidbit of what this movie was actually based on is a Jewish folktale called The Finger. And The Finger is literally the exact same premise, except the dude was doing his vows to a corpse hand as a joke, and it turned out she came to life. So kind of pretty similar stories. Now, me being curious as to the cult following, the people who follow this movie like crazy and love it, I asked you guys what you think about this movie, and I took out a few little comments so we could talk about it here. But before we get into that, let's have a quick word from our sponsor. Yes. Hello, everyone. It is I, Lord Pig, see? Lord, it's me. That's me. That's me. Here to tell you the tale of preservation, the preservation of the woodlands of Scotland, and while at the same time helping the global reforestation efforts. Established Titles is a project based on historic Scottish customs, whereas landowners are referred to as lords and ladies. And you yourself can own a nice plot of land that is at least 1 square foot in a beautiful private estate. You can become a lord, as I have. This is so official, you can legitimately put this on your credit card, on your plane tickets. Hell, even if you want to look a little bit fancy on your dating profile, Boom, there you go. And also, as the holidays are coming up on our faces, you know, with my nice little gift, you get a little Lord Lady gift. And guess what? The first 200 people who use my link in the description to get yourself an established title, become a Lord and a Lady, get right next to Lord Pig, me. We can create our own world, our own town in Scotland. I mean, it's only a 200 square foot town, but I mean, come on. Join my kingdom. And on top of that sale, if you use my code BionicPig, on top of that, you get an extra 10% off. So go to establishedtitles.com/BionicPig to get your gifts now and support the channel and become a Lord and a Lady. Kaylee Batchelor, honestly, the soundtrack is just amazing. Danny Elfman can't be a part of something without making it perfect. Something actually interesting about this soundtrack and Danny Elfman as well is one of the more popular songs of the movie is with the Skeleton Crew and Bojangles. They actually went through a bunch of auditions to find someone with a voice that would fit Bojangles, but they ended up just saying, hey, Danny Elfman, you want to just do the voice for us? Because Tim Burton just couldn't find anyone, and Danny Elfman decided, yeah, screw it, I'll do it anyway. Which is not something Danny Elfman is used to with such a raspy voice. He even said that after every single recording session, his voice was just shot. Toxic Chaos says, I love it because it's a unique take on the afterlife as well as the color palette. I absolutely love how the world is black and white while the underworld is this colorful yet still grimy place with all the greens and blues. It's so underrated. Throughout all the comments on my community post, I noticed that was probably the most talked about thing is the color palette, which I agree is one of the more interesting parts of the movie. I feel like it says multiple things, not just, you know, the case of what I talked about before with the social norms, and once you take those away, you're a little bit more free. I would say way more free. But also I feel like it's a good way to view death because in a way, even if nothing happens, regardless, you'll be free of your social chains, you'll be free of your stress, you know, you get to rest. Which is another way to think about how you should stop caring for social norms and constructs that weigh you down and live the way you want to live, because the afterlife may well be nothing. It's getting kind of dark here. Am I reading too deep into this movie? Maybe, but that's what makes these kind of movies fun and interesting. It's not the surface level of everything. It's digging down deep into the holes and seeing what's in them nice, juicy holes. I want to go in and see what's in that hole. Yeah, Natalie Bennett says it's one of my absolute favorites. I love the aesthetics, but mostly the piano music. I still listen to Victor's piano solo and the piano duet whenever I want to get in my feels. They're so moving and sometimes bring me to tears. I even learned to play Victor's piano solo in piano class a few years ago. I do feel like the classic Victorian vibe of the music is always beautiful. It's very bittersweet and melancholic, and it really does set the mood for this movie. Danny Elfman did a fantastic job. And not to mention, I'm not sure if many people know this, there was actually a song with Johnny Depp's character that was supposed to be a solo ballad that was scrapped from the movie. It was just a ballad piece where Victor basically recounts the situation, what is happening. It's kind of an inner monologue situation where he's kind of struggling with what choice he's gonna make in the next part of the movie. And honestly, after watching it, it doesn't make sense to me why they didn't put it in the movie, because there's a part in the movie, which, I mean, if you guys have seen the movie, you probably know what I'm talking about, where it kind of he just flips on a dime and you don't really get him with conflicting decisions or like a conflicting idea of what he wants to do. He's just this way one second, the next second he's just this way, and it's not really ever explained why. And it didn't really make much sense with his character, but if you put the song in there before he does this, it kind of clears stuff up for you. And not to mention, the song is just good. Like, it had potential to be on par with Jack's Lament. I mean, come on, it should have been in there. So let's go to the movie bit by bit here. So the world, like I said in the beginning, it's boring, it's gray, it's bleak, and it's in the Victorian era. We start the movie with Victor drawing a butterfly that he caught, and then he sets that butterfly free, which is actually an important detail that we're gonna be discussing later in the movie. We then zoom to a man who is sweeping in his shop in time with the clocks that are ticking behind him, showing an emphasis on how time is in control of our entire lives, and every second we tick towards death. Oh God. And then we see two men chopping up fish, and you know, everyone looks unhappy. Everyone looks like they hate their life. Then that same butterfly we were following through the town went up to the antagonist of this movie, who happens to be Barkus, and then we see Barkus kind of shooing away the butterfly, which is also A very important little detail. If you've seen the movie, you probably know what I'm saying. So we get to the first song, which is a lot about kind of just the state of living where they are. Because both parents on each side of the wedding are singing about how everything must go according to plan, exactly down to the cell what it's gonna be. And then we start to see that the only reason both of these families want their offspring to be wed is the fact that they are thinking that the other family has money, when both of them have no money. And also a nice little detail is throughout this song, we see Barkis kind of eavesdropping on them and hearing their conversation. And we also see how utterly terrible Victoria's parents are, as while they're singing, they literally call her face an utter disgrace. Great parenting. Victoria, you know, obviously worrying that she won't love the man that she's never seen before, that they're just gonna kind of throw at her and be like, hey, marry this guy, gets told by her parents that liking each other has nothing to do with marriage. Yeah, so, her parents aren't good people.
Do you suppose your father and I like each other?
Of course not.
So they all walk into the house in order to have a nice wedding rehearsal, and Victor starts playing the piano to pass the time. And honestly, this song, like the person who commented said, is an amazing song, and I love the piano in this. Victoria obviously overhears this, and then they end up striking up a little awkward conversation and start to realize that, oh, wait a second, we do actually like each other. So let's do this. Let's wed. Let's married it up, bro. So we start the rehearsal and instantly realize that Victor can't remember any of his lines, and he's just messing up terribly because he's nervous, obviously. He even so much as catches Mrs. Evergott's dress on fire, which is quickly doused by the magnificent Barkis. Yes, Barkis just happens to be there and show up for the rehearsal. Fucking bitch. And this part really shows how a lot of people focus on way more tradition rather than love when it comes to marriage, which, coming from someone who has been married and has been married for 8 years, realizes that weddings, yeah, they kind of suck. They're not about you. They're not about love. They're just about tradition. And it's a lot of times stupid. So anyway, literally everyone, even his own parents, kind of shun him and tell him to leave and don't come back until you figure out your lines perfectly. And similar in fashion to Jack Skellington walking out to the forest to find the doors, Victor actually walks out to the forest to practice his vows. And since he doesn't have the nervousness and the anxiety, he lands them perfectly and then puts the ring on what looks like a twig, but happens to be the corpse of a bride that has passed. That has passed. Do I really need to add that has passed? It's a corpse. And honestly, the way that she kind of comes out the ground and starts chasing him is just visually mesmerizing and terrifying at the same time. And also the transparent veil was one of the hardest things that they had to do in this entire movie. There's actually invisible wires in that little transparent veil. And they used like this little metal mushroom thing to make it look like waves when it goes, you know, look like it's floating in the water, ocean stuff. Stop motion's cool. And then we have an amazing transition. I just love this transition so much, where you see the outline of a skull and then it like dissolves into him waking up into the dead area, the afterlife. And obviously Victor starts panicking and asking for some questions.
I want some questions, now.
Answers. I think you mean answers.
Thank you, yes, answers. I need answers.
And then we have Danny Elfman voicing the skeleton known as Bojangles, and he sings the tragic tale of Emily, the corpse bride. Now, me personally, I didn't really like the Danny Elfman song that much, but I mean, that's just me. I know everyone loves it, but at least I like the lyrics. I do like the lyrics of this, because the chorus goes, die, die, we all pass away, but don't wear a frown because it's really okay. You might try and hide, you might try and pray, but we all end up the remains of the day, which obviously death, you know, pretty important topic of this movie. I feel like a lot of people need to hear this message in one way or another, and we all just need to realize that we're just gonna end up behind a Wendy's in a dumpster at the end of the day. No one actually cares. You know what I'm saying? Maybe I'll be on the Wendy's dumpster. Maybe you guys will be somewhere else. I don't have that written in my will or anything. Okay, moving on. But we discovered that Emily's death was actually a product of an evil man she eloped with, and then that evil man proceeded to murder her to take all of her money. So yeah, She had a sucky death there, I'd say. But anyway, she's been waiting there at her death site for someone to finally wed her. And, Victor accidentally did that. Now, back at the land of the living, it seems the town crier, who honestly is one of the funniest characters in the movie because he's just a dude who walks around and screams headlines all day. But he tells the parents loudly that Victor was seen with another woman on the bridge. However, the town crier was brought to them by none other than, you guessed it, Bacchus, who seems like he's gradually weaseling his way inside of them, in their group. Not. Ugh. So Victor has a little sit down with Emily and her conscience, which just happens to be a maggot in her head who refers to himself as her conscience. Victor tells her, he can't do this because, I'm alive and you're dead. And she replies with giving him a present. A wedding present that happens to be his dog Scraps that died. And something really cool about this scene, the visuals are great throughout this, but there's so much detail. Like in this part right here, everyone kind of gives off a little bit of a glow, whereas Victor kind of sucks the color away when he's around. Like if you look when Emily's sitting next to Victor, she has this bluish, creepy glow to her, whereas Victor just has a gray, sucky vibe where it looks like he's just sucking all the life out of everything. But anyway, Victor comes up with a plan to get back to the land of the living where he tells her, hey, we're married, you should meet my parents. So they go to Elder Gutnick, who says the best line in the entire movie. After Emily asks to go upstairs, which would be the land of the living, Elder Gutnick replies with,
now why go up there when people are dying to get down here?
That's an underrated line. That is a top tier line right there. So anyway, he sends them to the world of the living, and Victor ends up convincing Emily to stay there. He's gonna bring his mom out there and surprise her, but actually he's just gonna go talk to Victoria instead. So he finds Victoria. He confesses that he was a little bit scared of marriage in the beginning, but now he's ready and he loves her and stuff. And then poof, Emily's there. And I just love how her crawling into the window looks like a zombie or a horror movie type dealio. So Emily ends up saying the ominous words hopscotch as they fall back into the afterlife. So Victor ends up telling Emily again, yo, you're dead, I'm alive. This can't work out. We don't got anything in common. And then Emily has a song where her Black Widow and her maggot friend, who you would consider to be like a conscience, her little friends end up telling her yo, you're better than that girl up there. It doesn't matter if you're dead. You have so many things. Living people are overrated. And then she answers back with, what are you talking about, bro? I'm dead. You can't hurt me. You could light me on fire and I won't feel I'm dead, bro. And then it ends with a little bit of sadness, I may not have a heart, but it's breaking. Tear. So now we go back to the land of the living, and Victoria tells her mom everything, that he was quote unquote kidnapped by a corpse and he married a corpse. And her mom's response was,
Victor was in your room. The scandal.
Great parenting. So Victoria gets locked in her room. She ends up sneaking out to speak to the only person who she believes could help her with the dead is Pastor Galswells. And she asks him about the dead and if they could marry the living and if they could walk among us. And his response was, taking her back to her parents and calling her crazy. I honestly love that part because it leads up to the pastor being like, how do you know about this and stuff? And then he just takes her back saying that she's speaking in tongues. A very realistic versions. I feel like a lot of movies there's always one guy that knows about it, but not in this one. So finally, Bacchus, after whittling down the Evagots, agree that he will wed Victoria. And it's funny to see how both of them are misinterpreting each other's words, because as they're talking to each other, the Evergots believe that Bacchus is rich, whereas Bacchus believes that they are rich. So it's kind of like everyone wants someone to get married for money, but no one has money. And obviously Victoria's against it, but no one gives a shit. You're a woman in the Victorian times. So we do end up getting a nice moment with Emily and Victor. He obviously feels bad for some of the stuff he said, so he goes in there and he finds her playing piano. piano, which Victor also plays piano. So he ends up joining her and playing, and they do a little ditty, and again, it's a really pretty song. And it really starts to become a close moment between the two, where Victor's like, oh, we actually do have something in common, you know, even though she's dead. And actually, the only way Victor was able to find out about Victoria and the marriage and Bacchus was the fact that the coachman, you know, the dude who drives the horses and such, he died recently. I don't know if he choked on something or just coughed to death, but he died. And he ended up telling Victor about everything that's going on. And I believe this would be around the time where the unused song would go in here, because a lot of this part doesn't make too much sense. See, Victor overhears a conversation with the elder telling Emily that the only way their marriage can continue is if Victor willingly gives up his life, because, you know, she's dead and he's alive. To death do you part. That shit, it won't work out. And Emily finally realizing that she could not push him to do something like that, and really just the selfish nature of her marriage in general, she tells the elder, no, I can't do that. And then Victor walks out and goes, fuck it, let's do it. I'll die right now. I'll do it right now.
Then die.
Which is why, again, that song would play a great part right here, as there's not really any character change or internal dilemma or development. He doesn't even think of the idea of just going to the living and stopping the marriage. I mean, earlier he was talking about how he loves Victoria and wants to do everything for her, yet all of a sudden he's just, I'm gonna kill myself for another woman. I mean, come on, did you see? We shredded on that piano. Like, we absolutely shredded that piano, dude. Like, we're meant for each other. This is probably the only part of the movie where I have a little bit of an issue with, because there could be a lot here. They could have added a lot here. You know, him and Emily could have had another moment together that could have put them closer together and make them start loving each other. He could have had a song where maybe he's sitting there contemplating the idea of even marrying Emily, or maybe trying to go stop the wedding or something like that. Like, there's a lot in between that could have been good content, but it wasn't there. But regardless, it happens. It's kind of like on a dime, but whatever, the movie continues. And he even gets the elder to agree to let everyone go to the world of the living, to a real, quote unquote, real church to hold a wedding. And we go from a colorful, vibrant environment of celebrating someone's love for each other to the gray world above, where everyone is sitting in silence at a wedding reception. And something interesting I noticed about Victoria, ever since she found out that she had to marry Bacchus, she's been in a constant state of just like shock, where she's just like staring forward, almost as if all the life has been sucked out of her. She's basically turning into what everyone else is in this gray and bleak world, unhappy, bored, and just nothing in a way. Because if she did end up marrying Bacchus, like, she would just be what everyone else is. So it's interesting to see like her character change. Like, ever since Bacchus came into the picture, she's just been a stone cold staring at nothing. But the party, if you want to call it that, was crashed by the dead coming to the living. And what starts out as everyone being terrified for their lives turns into a very heartwarming reunion of the dead as people start recognizing some of the dead people. You know, past husbands, past wives, parents, grandparents, etc. So they all go to the church and the wedding begins, and as Emily is about to say her final vows, she sees Victoria in the corner of her eye. And this is when she really starts realizing, you know, what am I doing? This is such a selfish thing to do. I mean, she's taking a husband away from someone who needs him. I wouldn't really say deserve, because in a way, Emily does deserve a husband. And because Emily, you know, she's already passed. And whereas she didn't deserve, obviously, that, you know, she didn't deserve to die, she realizes that she's not going to be a part of the problem, basically. She's not going to take someone from someone else like what happened to her. Her life was taken from her. And as Emily puts it, I love you, but you are not mine. An unselfish love that would do anything in her power to make that person happy, even if it means letting him go. However, the wedding happened to be crashed by none other than, you guessed it, Bacchus, who Emily instantly recognizes. Yes, obviously, Bacchus is her killer. I mean, you probably could have figured that out by now. Him and Victor end up getting into a nice battle with a fork and a sword. And who comes to save him? None other than Emily. As Emily steps in front of the sword and gets stabbed through the chest, just as she did when she was killed by him. So after the elder mentions that we're amongst the living, we have to play by their rules, basically saying, you know, the dead can't mess with the living because they're already passed. Bacchus starts taunting not only Emily, but everyone else, basically being posh and an asshole, like, yeah, you're never gonna get a husband now, bitch. And then, like a complete foolish idiot, he gets everything he deserves and drinks the drink that Victor was destined to drink, and, you know, he dies. And that rule, you know, don't mess with the living, is kind of broken now. So they take Bacchus into a room, and who knows? Who knows what happens to him there? So in the end, Emily was set free, and in a way, it was true love that kind of set her free. That unselfish love, that helping someone else find love in a way. She was kind of held down by the idea that she needs to find someone to marry. She needs to be wed in order to be happy and released and free. But then she finally realized that that's just not what she needs to do. And she fades away into some blue butterflies that we saw in the beginning with Victor and the butterfly that he was drawing. And also we saw in the beginning where Bacchus was shooing away the blue butterfly. He was there the whole time. It's such a good bittersweet ending because obviously it's happy because Victor and Victoria got to end up, marrying each other. But Emily, you know, it's just kind of a tragedy. She didn't deserve to die, but at least she realized what she was looking for the whole time, because the beauty is in the details, baby. I completely understand why so many people love this movie and like the cult following behind it. I really do love it. If you guys want to talk to me more about this movie or other movies, you could join me live. I'm streaming on Bionic Pig Live on YouTube, probably right now. And if you guys like this video, want to see more, if you're new here, subscribe, all that stuff. Like the video. Thank you. Bye.